Here's the story of how one man robbed the Bellagio and how he just wanted to get caught. The Heist. The time was around 4 in the morning on an early Tuesday morning. It's the middle of December in 2010. Even for Vegas at this hour during December isn't a busy time. Anthony Carleo had just ridden up to the Bellagio and parked his Suzuki motorcycle close to the valet stand. He backed his bike up next to a service path. He made sure to point the bike straight at the exit to Flamingo Road. Carleo casually strolled into the Bellagio, but his heart was pounding hard. He wore dark overalls with gloves. He still has his motorcycle helmet on with the visor down. Inside his left pocket was a gun. He actually waved to a security guard walking around on duty. She was completely oblivious to what was about to happen. She even waved back at him. Carleo quickly walked towards the high-limit craps table, one of the only tables open at that time. Quickly he yelled, "Move, move!" The players and the dealers were surprised and jumped away from the table when they saw his gun. There were millions of dollars in chips on the table, and Carleo began to grab all the chips he could. He shoveled handful after handful of chips into his backpack for roughly 15 seconds. But Carleo would confess later that it felt like 15 years. Anthony Carleo had just robbed the Bellagio for roughly $1.5 million in chips in less than 3 minutes. How did it get to this point? For Tony Carleo, it all began with something he saw with his own eyes when he was in his early 20s. He was in Vegas in a casino and he was watching a man gamble. That gambler was betting on hard 8 at a craps table. That's a bet he would roll a pair of 4s before rolling a 7 or any other combination of 8. It's a bet with 10 to 1 odds of it happening, but he hit that first bet with only a $5 chip. Then he let the winnings ride and hit it again. And then he let it ride again on the same bet and hit again. On and on the man rolled and somehow avoided crapping out. To hit hard 8 once was improbable. To hit it 4 times in a row is almost a once-in-a-lifetime event. The man cashed out $50,000 off of just a single $5 chip. What he saw with his own eyes is what inspired Tony. He had a belief that as long as you have the guts to let the universe dictate your fate, there's no telling what might come your way. Well, in his case, that was definitely true. Anthony Carleo's first heist was not the Bellagio robbery. Just 5 days earlier, he had done his first heist at the Suncoast Casino. He held up the Suncoast poker room for a little bit over $19,000 in cash in pretty much the same way as he did the Bellagio. Why the Suncoast poker room? It was because he was a new regular in the poker games there. The problem was that he was a losing player, and he couldn't afford playing in the games anymore because of how much he had lost playing poker. Gambling wasn't what Carleo was good at. In fact, he knew he was not good at poker, but he was determined to change his luck. So he did the next best thing in his mind, and that was to rob the poker game. Carleo went to Las Vegas with a dream of a new life. He had previously tried to make his mark in rental real estate back in Colorado in the mid-2000s, but then the financial crisis hit and he was underwater on all his mortgages. He was in foreclosure for 4 different properties. He had listed assets of roughly $212,000, but he had liabilities of more than $356,000. So in May 2009, he filed for bankruptcy and looked for a new life out west. This was his way of letting the universe dictate his fate. By gutting his underwater houses of anything valuable, he was able to leave his Colorado life behind with $30,000 cash. He had dreams of being a doctor, so he registered for classes at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He wanted to walk a straight and narrow path, kind of like his dad, Las Vegas Municipal Judge George Assad. You may be wondering, how come their last names are different? His parents had split up and he took on his stepfather's last name when he had moved out to Colorado. But that was a previous lifetime. Right now, Carleo was looking to carve a new identity. The problem for Tony was that he was impatient. He wanted success too quickly, and he was way too distracted. He was able to only hold things together for 2 semesters at UNLV before the all-too-common Vegas party lifestyle took over. In late November of 2010 was when things started falling apart for Carleo. This was during a 2-week Thanksgiving break from classes. Instead of his usual partying, he started gambling. He played poker and other table games at the Suncoast Casino that was close to his house. That was the decision that determined his fate in life. He quickly lost half of his savings gambling in just a few days. And being the impatient and impulsive person he was, he wanted to make his money back quickly. He took his last $12,000 to the Bellagio and entered a high-stakes poker game. The poker pros at the Bellagio were loving it. In a matter of hours, he lost the rest of his bankroll. He had no money left. No, this wasn't when he decided to go into crime just yet. He still had to hit rock bottom. After losing everything just the night before, Carleo was able to scrape together $800 the very next morning by selling prescription medicine he had. And then he drove straight back to the Bellagio to gamble. But turning $800 into $30,000 is a pipe dream. He wasn't good at poker, and he certainly wasn't lucky in any other games. He quickly lost the rest of that money too. What Carleo had wanted was right in front of him. On every blackjack and craps table were hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting in the open. He started thinking how easy it is to just reach over and grab the chips. He still believed that he could turn his luck around. He still wanted to gamble, but he just didn't have money. At this point, he couldn't even afford to get into the low-stakes poker games at Suncoast. A few nights after his Bellagio gambling disaster, his fantasy of grabbing chips came true first at the Suncoast Casino. Because of how easy it was for him to rob the Suncoast poker room, he got the idea for holding up the Bellagio craps table. Doing his first heist made him realize how easy it was. All it took was literally a couple of minutes and a quick exit. The hardest part was actually just getting himself to do it. By robbing the Bellagio, Carleo had achieved something he hadn't been able to do ever. He had made money all by himself, even if it was illegal. And he was now a millionaire. And this fed his ego, an ego that became his downfall. Now remember, he had only casino chips. If you guys don't know much about the way chips work, we'll give you the inside scoop. Not just anyone can cash high-denomination chips. Anything below a $500 chip, sure, no problem. Even a $500 chip, sure, why not? But start having 1K and 5K chips, dealers are going to remember who you are. And depending on the casino, they track different high-denomination chips. Some casinos will track people getting chips as low as 1K. Carleo would have to hand chips to Bellagio cashiers and hope they just give him cash. And obviously, he can't cash in $1.5 million in chips all at once. He would have to do it over and over again. But to be honest, it could be done. It's not easy, but it could be done if he had patience. All he needed to do was not attract attention to himself. So what exactly did he do? The exact opposite. Carleo was back the very next day at the Bellagio, but to his surprise, no one recognized him. Nothing was different at the Bellagio. It was just like any other day at the casino. Except for Carleo, he had a lot more money on him. He went ahead and sat down at a high-stakes poker game. He had a bunch of $100 bills from the earlier Suncoast robbery. To be honest, what Carleo did actually wasn't that bad. Showing up at the casino to start washing his chips slowly is actually the right plan. Here's the thing though. You can't cash in chips without gambling. Maybe once or twice you can show up and people wouldn't think anything. But as we mentioned earlier, it's not possible to cash in all his chips at once. And if you're consistently cashing in chips, then you have to gamble, or else the employees are going to start catching on that something's not right. Playing high-stakes poker is actually the perfect ruse. All he has to do is buy in a few times using a combination of real cash and chips. During the time in Vegas, cash played on the table. Once he's done with his session, he can chip up, as a lot of poker players do, because carrying around a ton of chips is cumbersome. That way, he can slowly start washing the big chips. And, oh yeah, this plan only works assuming he was at least a break-even poker player. Throughout the night, Carleo slipped a few stolen $5,000 chips into his poker stack. The Bellagio doesn't bother to track who wins and who loses at poker. It's too complicated. Casinos only track who's been playing what game and at what table via a player's card. Carleo probably knew that he had to use his player's card while gambling, because literally every single regular high-stakes gambler uses a player's card. That's because every player wants to earn comps at the casino. Because he's been playing poker, at the end of the night he had no trouble cashing out, even though the cashier asked to check his ID and player's card. The poker room was the safest place to launder his chips. But remember we said earlier that Carleo had no patience? Even in the success of getting away with a robbery, he wanted everything too fast. It was only a couple of nights later before he began looking for bigger action. He found his way to the craps pits, to table number 5, the exact same table he had just robbed days earlier. Just why? Why would he do this? Was this his subconscious wanting to get caught? Was it about the money, or was it about the ego for him? At this point, the story of the biker bandit was all over the news. Carleo was on local TV everywhere. Every local news station had already aired the surveillance tape of him robbing the Bellagio. People gambling were talking about him. And for Carleo, it gave him a thrill because it gave him status. He admitted himself in interviews that he liked listening to other people telling the stories, but it probably ate him alive that he couldn't tell everyone that it was him who actually did it. Everyone had their own theory on how smart the bandit actually was and what he would do after the robbery. Carleo began gambling in the pits like a high roller. He was playing big, and he attracted attention. The staff at the Bellagio began noticing him, but they didn't think that he was the biker bandit or anything. They just wanted to make sure he kept on gambling big. Casinos keep high rollers playing by comping them. They'll give them sweets, free food, and tickets to shows just to keep them at the casino. Carleo was assigned his own casino host, a usual tactic for anyone gambling a lot. They comped him expensive dinners and $600 a night suites. And he loved playing the role of the high roller. Carleo couldn't tell anything was wrong, and he was living the life. None of the dealers, pit bosses, or security guards treated him any differently from the other gamblers. And he had a lot of chips that he could toss around in the Bellagio. He felt that he was in the clear, and he was, for now. Over the next several weeks, Carleo blew thousands of dollars partying, but that wasn't his real problem. His biggest issue? It was gambling. He wouldn't be careful with the chips that he had. He never treated the chips as if they were real cash. All he wanted to do at that point was just play the part of being a big gambler. He was already living what he wanted in life, even if it was fake. The problem for Carleo was that he had more than $1 million in cranberry chips, roughly $1.1 million. Cranberry chips were worth $25,000 a piece. These were only used by people who were the biggest of the big high rollers. Bellagio had every single person whom they had given cranberry chips before in a database. Needless to say, Carleo was not on the list, so basically, his $1.1 million worth of chips were worthless. He really only had around $400,000 he could launder and use outside the casino. Carleo should have been smart. He should have thought about his heist as a $400,000 heist and just threw away the cranberry chips. An almost $500,000 score is a big score for any thief, especially for someone that just got into it. He should have known that he would be giving up his life if he tried to cash in the cranberries. Anyone he tried to launder the chips through would immediately hold immense power over him. Although getting on the list of high rollers is possible, it's still extremely risky. He was at least smart enough to know that trying to cash a single cranberry chip would immediately raise suspicions. He should have been patient and played the part of high roller for much longer, but he acted with very little restraint. He didn't make the smart or safe play. For example, on New Year's Eve of that year, Carleo flew an old friend named Alex up from Colorado for a visit. That night, Alex watched him bet $10,000 a hand on blackjack, and losing repeatedly. Alex tried to stop him, but Carleo couldn't stop himself as he kept on chasing his losses. When the new year rang in, he was still firing off big bets. Eventually, he lost all the chips and money he had on him, over $100,000. That was just one example. Carleo was losing money and losing it fast. It's only been a little over 2 weeks since he pulled off his heist. In the meantime, Las Vegas detectives Sam Smith and Jason Nelson were going through all their leads in their hunt, but they kept on hitting dead ends. They were getting plenty of leads, but none of them made sense, and none of them pointed towards Carleo. Then the detectives met a man they call Leo. Leo was a poker dealer at the Bellagio. He said that he knew who the robber was. Leo was from Jersey, and apparently he reminded the detectives of the Joe Pesci character from the Lethal Weapon movies, and that's why they called him Leo. Leo said that in the days leading up to the robbery, he had spoken with a poker player who had lost his bankroll, and he had shared a fantasy he had of stealing casino chips. He didn't think anything of it. A week later, Leo saw the same poker player again, except this time, only now he seemed to have come into a lot of money. He was sitting in games he could have never been able to afford before. Leo started playing detective, and he began talking to other dealers. He talked to cashiers to confirm his suspicion that the poker player was buying in with chips and not cash. Leo told the detectives the man's name. After the heist, Carleo barely left the Bellagio. The only times he would leave was to pick up stolen chips he had stashed around town or to unload cash into a safety deposit box at a bank. At one point, the box held more than $100,000 in cash. But after the New Year's Eve fiasco, he was down to his last $20,000 cash. Of the roughly $400,000 of easily convertible chips he had gotten from his heist, just a single 5K chip remained. He basically was back to his original point, except this time he was a wanted man. Because he was strapped for cash, his fantasies took over again. He fantasized about cutting a deal with someone, such as famous poker pro Phil Ivey, someone the Bellagio could conceivably believe had access to a major bankroll. Carleo wasn't the only one trying to solve the puzzle. Poker players on poker forums were discussing the Bellagio heist and what the robber could do with the stolen chips. He actually followed the discussions closely and even went as far as creating an account on forums. He was so naive and egotistical, he chose his screen name as Ocean Spray 25 and listed his location as Granada on the biggest poker forum in the world, 2plus2.com. One day, Matthew Brooks, a recreational player in Virginia, posted the hypothetical question: how many cranberries would you trade for a legit 5K chip? Carleo began messaging Brooks with private messages. He asked Brooks if he would trade 4 5K chips for 3 cranberry chips. Brooks didn't know how seriously to take him. He was thinking that no one would actually be that dumb, right? In one of his messages, Carleo gave him a number to call. So Brooks called him up out of sheer curiosity. During the call, Carleo shared with him the exact details about the robbery. Just why? He could have just said he stole some chips off some high roller. Brooks asked for proof that he was indeed the Bellagio Bandit. So Carleo emailed Brooks a picture of 2 cranberry chips resting on a piece of paper signed Biker Bandits. If that's not wine to be caught, then we don't know what is. Detective Nelsons and Smith got their best lead from Leo. They learned that Carleo held a Class M license to drive a motorcycle. They learned that he had declared bankruptcy a year before. They learned that all of a sudden he had started gambling for big money. It was just red flag after red flag after red flag. Nelson also turned up one more fact. They figured out that his dad was a sitting Las Vegas judge, George Assad. They knew that if they were not right, their careers were pretty much going to go nowhere. On January 13th, Las Vegas detectives put a trap and trace on Carleo's cell phone to log all of his incoming and outgoing calls. A week later, they pulled all his player records. In the 4 years leading up to the robbery, Carleo had lost a total of $2,900 at the casino. Since the robbery, he had lost $105,000. By that time, they knew that he was the bandit. But knowing and proving are two different things. Brooks still couldn't believe what he got from Carleo. Obviously, he didn't have any 5K Bellagio chips. He came to realize that he was talking to the real Bellagio Bandit. He forwarded the photo Carleo gave him to the Bellagio and to the Las Vegas police. The IP address attached to the email revealed that it was sent from the house of Judge George Assad. A few days later, Carleo was at the Venetian playing in a $1,500 buy-in poker tournament. During the dinner break, a stranger came up and sat at his table. The man knew the poker dealer and made small talk, but he also began introducing himself to Carleo. Kian Kava was a local doctor, and somewhere he had heard that Carleo had $25,000 chips for sale. Carleo made absolutely no connection between the doctor and what he had revealed to Brooks on email and over the phone. It wasn't too long before he agreed to meet with Dr. Kava and a connected guy from New Jersey named Dominic, who would be a buyer of cranberry chips. Dominic worked in the loan sharking business back east and was thinking of starting up a crew out in Las Vegas. Carleo started off being very cautious and suspicious. When Dominic offered him $10,000 in cash right then and there for a cranberry chip, Carleo actually wouldn't take it. Carleo met with Dominic repeatedly over the next few days and gradually came to trust him. They played blackjack together and traded text messages about which college football games to bet on. Over expensive steak dinners and gambling together, they discussed the deal for cranberry chips. On January 30th, Dominic slid a wine list menu across the table to Carleo over dinner. Inside the menu was $10,000 in cash and some smaller chips. Carleo pocketed the money and passed a $25,000 chip back to Dominic. Carleo would sell a total of $100,000 worth of cranberry chips over the course of the next 2 days. On February 2nd, they met one last time in a Bellagio bathroom. 6 Vegas police officers stormed through the bathroom door and yelled at Carleo to get on the floor. The dream was over. Dominic was actually a Las Vegas police officer named Mike Gennaro. Dr. Cavall was actually a real medical doctor. He was just a friend of Gennaro's and also a casual poker player who had agreed to help. The money and chips Gennaro used to gamble with and buy Carleo's cranberries had been loaned to him by the Bellagio itself. Just 7 weeks after Carleo's big heist, he was now in handcuffs, and his dad was voted off the bench before his sentencing. He ended up getting between 9 and 27 years in prison for the Bellagio heist and the Suncoast robbery. The earliest he can get out is around the end of 2020. In another universe, he gambled at the Bellagio a little bit every day like a lot of gamblers in Vegas do. He was smart and he realized that he didn't need to start off so big. That way no one in his life had any suspicion. He never told anyone about the robbery, and he certainly didn't flaunt any big chips. He worked his way up in the poker room and moved through the stakes each year. And you know what? He actually became decent over time. To anyone in the poker room, he wasn't crushing the game, but he was good enough to move up the stakes each year. And a mid-stakes poker player making 6 figures a year in Las Vegas isn't anything unusual. Carleo was just like any other poker player in Vegas. He was a consistent winner who liked to gamble a little bit of his poker winnings in the pits from time to time. He washed his chips from the heist at the Bellagio over a course of 5 years, and he even hit it big a few times at blackjack on the nights he had big wins at poker. And he was able to color up his chips to get on the cranberry list. And eventually, over time, he was just another high roller who had made his money through poker. But of course, this is Carleo in another universe. Watch this next video to find out about the untold truth about the escape from Alcatraz.